Okay, welcome everyone to today's Clean Network call. I hope all of you are having a good beginning summer. Before we start with our presentation for today, I'll ask if there are any announcements. If not any announcements, is there anybody who's new who'd like to introduce themselves?
Yeah.
Nan?
Hi there. I'm new to these small group meetings, but I've been on the listserv for a while and I've attended some of the larger events. My name is Nan Renner. I'm based at UC San Diego, Birch Aquarium, which is part of Scripps Institution of Oceanography, where we connect with a lot of climate and environmental scientists and take a whole Earth systems approach. And I have a second appointment with a center focused on equity in education at UC San Diego, and do a lot of work with the subject matter projects here.
Okay, thank
Happy to
you.
be here.
So if you've been around for a while, as Gina did, you can introduce yourself in the chat for those that are new. Anybody else that's new that'd like to introduce themselves? Okay, well, I'll revisit. Are there any announcements? Okay, well, I'll just let you know, I'm Tamara Ledley. I've been a long time founding member of CLEAN and haven't been on many of the calls recently, but have been part of this group for a very long time. So I'm glad to see it very active and going and continuing on with its various activities. There are no other announcements. We will get to our presentation today. So we have Mark Basnage is going to be talking to us about designing ambitious pathways to climate careers. Mark began his career leading children's educational programming at a natural history museum in Philadelphia, helping to develop and scale a science teaching and learning improvement project through the public elementary schools in northern Philadelphia. Since then, he's worked in and with public, private, and charter schools on both coasts, leading innovative efforts, developing strategic plans, and designing programs and professional development exercises. Make Knowledge is the nonprofit Mark founded and works to create ecosystems of opportunity and education. And this includes significant work at the crossroads of climate and career, helping schools and districts engage with the climate crisis with the level of innovation, equity, and collaboration that the moment requires. Mark has received fellowships from the Orion Society and the Fulbright Memorial Fund and was among the first recipients of Philadelphia's Great Friends to Kids Awards. Mark currently splits his time between San Francisco Bay Area and the Philadelphia area. And again, he's going to be talking to us about designing ambitious pathways to climate careers. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Mark.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate the chance to be here. Let me share my screen and get into it. I would welcome, I'm really happy to be here because this is such a great group. I've enjoyed starting to become a part of it in the last year or so, and welcome your feedback. I love thinking with other people and working with other people. So that's the spirit in which I'm offering this, is that, I really want to make this something that we can, see how these ideas sound, see if there's some ideas here that will help you in your work. That would be best case scenario for me. So yeah, as you heard, I'm Mark Basnage, and I'm currently in California, although I do move around a little bit. So when we talk about climate careers, I love this quote recently from Molly Wood, who was, the climate crisis is the singular story of our time. It's the biggest business story in the world, an opportunity to build a completely new economy. It's the industrial revolution and the internet age all at once. We have the chance to reinvent everything now. I think that captures a little bit of the energy that I think can be there for us thinking about creating climate pathways to climate careers, that it's really yes, it's a crisis, and it's also a chance to reinvent. and in a very equitable way. So if the goal is giant collaborative climate action, then there will be a lot of careers involved, which means we need to create lots and lots and lots of new career pathways so that all students are prepared for that. If that's a premise, right? If that's the assumption, then it raises a whole bunch of questions right away. Like, can we do that? Can we create lots of career options and create these opportunities without sort of squelching the deepest instincts of school to be, its liberal impulses, its liberatory impulses. There are more questions about, like, how do we go about scaling? Where do we start? Do we start on the top or the bottom and go the other way? And what is the role of the individual school or individual district? And then, of course, what even are green jobs? Like, is every job really a green job? And what does that mean for how do we take action in creating these pathways? Okay, but before I get into those questions and hopefully some answers, just wanted to shift back and think about where we are with schools and students and teachers in the US right now, right? We have about 100,000 public schools right now, K-12 in the United States, and another 30,000 private schools. I will just pause here for a second to say, these slides will be up on the website. I'm gonna just send them to Gina right after this. And so you'll be able to see it. So you don't have, you free to take notes and screenshots, but you're also going to get the slides. So a huge variety of schools and about 60 million public school students, about just under 5 million private school students in the US, and 3.5 million teachers total in K-12, right? So it's a big job, I mean, to create these changes. And just to give you a glimpse of how fractured the system is, not only do we not have, it might be somewhat easier in the, in a place like Japan or France, where there's a national education policy and the infrastructure to support that. We don't have that. And we not only is it very much state by state, but even within a place like the Bay Area, you have 7 counties, and within those counties, you have endless numbers of school districts. So to even think about it like a Bay Area regional approach to climate careers, climate action and climate careers, even that is incredibly fractured. You have public districts, some are K-12, some are K-8, or 9-12, and you have private schools, and you have independent single site charters and charter management organizations running big numbers of charters or small numbers. So it's really hard to think about how to, it can be really daunting to think about how to scale this work. But even within the pathway of an individual student, I think it's really important to also keep that in mind. As a student goes from pre-K, preschool, pre-K, kindergarten through 8, 9 through 12, and then on to community college or up higher ed, I think it's important to think about that. We have this still somewhere in our psyche, we have this idea that the school is the site for learning, and we sort of lose sight of we don't always fully acknowledge that. In fact, there's so many other places where students are getting knowledge now. This is not Little House on the Prairie anymore, right? It's not just the internet, of course, although that's key, but there's so many other nonprofits and clubs and after school programs, museums and formal education programs, all kinds, this big cloud that surrounds the student pathway, right? And often in really good ways, and sometimes in unintentionally bad ways, right? Students can decide that they're not a math person or a science person or whatever. As they're moving through their pathway, they're having these invisible conversations with all of these other, with these agents, with their peers, with their grades, with their interactions with these all of these influences. Well, I think we can agree this to create ambitious action requires new ways of doing things. And one of my first premises, I'm going to share a few big ideas. One of the first ones is that creating climate pathways shares a lot of DNA with really good climate education, right? Which is education for action. So both of those things ideally require breaking down the walls of the classroom or the walls of the school, right? So instead of just learning about interactions in nature, you might be building a school garden in there, or helping to reforest your schoolyard for climate action, right? And similarly, you can't really career pathways require building partnerships outside the boundaries of the school. And we'll talk about some of the other characteristics of this DNA that is shared between those two. But I think that one of the other things that's really important is that they can create positive spillover effects. As you create climate pathways, in other words, in your school system and community, that creates positive spillover into climate education and vice versa. Okay. Yeah, and then there's that robust collaborative regional design and support. So this has been this is another key point, I think, is that it's not just learning about climate that we're talking about, or learning about career, is that, you know, as Krasny says, there's all these other intermediate outcomes that help to develop student agency and be more that are predictive of taking climate action, rather than just learning facts about climate. That you're actually building student knowledge and experiences in these other areas, like a sense of place, self-efficacy, collaboration, all these other kinds of things. And I think this is sometimes more acknowledged on the climate education side and less on the climate pathway side. But it happens also just to be good pedagogy in general, aside from climate, right? That we know that deeper learning, good, rich, deep learning means that we're not just stringing facts together, but we're practicing the whole game at a junior level. We're learning how to do what professionals do, but at an age-appropriate level. And then the third big piece that I think we should keep in mind when we're building climate pathways is that we want to keep all the segments of climate action in mind. So of course, mitigation, which we always, that's the easy one that comes to mind, right? We want to mitigate, we want to bend the curve, we want to draw down climate emissions, and we want to promote careers that are involved in that, right? So things like obviously all the clean energy things and solar and EVs and all that stuff, right? Mitigation is super important. And we know that at the same time, we know it's also too late to ignore adaptation, right? We have to be reacting to the effects we're already seeing and the ones we should be anticipating seeing in sea level rise or increased heat spikes and heat islands, and so on. So adaptation is really important. And then the one that gets really ignored a lot, but I think is critical, is we also need to be building towards transformation, which is moving our society away from extractive systems and hyper-focus on economic growth. We need to be building towards a world of well-being, care, and belonging. And this image on the right is from Kate Rayworth. It was it's from one of her. She came up with a donut economics model, and it's from a publication that compares a whole bunch of these transformation models, basically. I can put the link in the final slide deck. And finally, then the fourth thing is that we need to attend to timescales, right? If we're building just for the careers we know about now, the careers that are out there from 0 to 5 years, then you can do things like, if you're only thinking about that, you can really lean heavily on labor market demand. It's already being signaled that we need more EV charging stations. So we need more electricians. We need more ship captains to haul the wind turbines out to sea, things like that. That's really clearly defined in the labor market. Jobs are also clearly defined and known. And so in the 0 to 5 year range, there tends to be more of a focus, I think, on mitigation and adaptation. And we know how to do this in CTE and career technical education realm. We know how to do this because we have had practice with it in creating training programs for plumbers and construction workers and so on. We've been doing this already, and so it's a much more concrete kind of thing. the further you look out, the more you have to think, not just how do I stack a certain number of work skills, but how do I attend to the whole K-12 experience? And things get a little more interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary. The further you go out, the less that clear the data in labor market information is going to be. And the more and the promise of this is that the more you can aim at the transformational, right? And also do things like ensuring entrepreneurial equity. In other words, like I want to make sure that all of my students not only can find the clearly defined jobs, but can help create the next jobs, right? Can help create the organizations and companies and careers and markets that we need 20 years from now, right? So that's the entrepreneurial equity part. So I thought it might be good just to run through a few quick examples and just open it up to questions to see how this lands and where the discussion goes after that. So I want to mention 3 quick examples. They're in varied geographies, but also varied sort of levels of progress and speculation. So I want to think about Menlo Park in California for just a second. It's like right in the middle of the affluent Bay Area community. It's next to Stanford University. And it's only 30,000 people. So you think it might be really easy to do some action there, create some interesting and good programs. And there was some truth to that. There's the city itself, 30,000 people. The city itself has big climate ambitions in terms of building electrification. So that's wonderful. Interesting though, when you dig into the schools, Menlo Park, even though it's so tiny, has 3 elementary school districts. And one of them is stuck, one of them represents this green triangle area on the map, which is Bellhaven neighborhood, which is not an affluent community, which is also not, if you were to see a satellite image, you'd also see that doesn't have the tree cover of the West Menlo Park area. It was kind of just forcibly stuck on to Menlo Park like 50 years ago, and it's in a separate school district, and then in the elementary school district. And so there's you can imagine that scaling action in a really consistent and equitable way in the city is hard if they're not even in the same elementary district, right? And then high school districts are also split in Menlo Park. So it's what might look really easy at first, it turns out to have some big challenges. And that said, like the main school district on the west side does have good relationships, like it's taking action on a bunch of active transportation issues. They're working with Safe Routes to School to encourage active transportation, biking and walking to school, and the safety around that. So there are really good things happening, but they're not, there's not right now this synergy that could be. And so I wanted to suggest, like, tying my themes together, like how might we develop a sort of framework to help a geography like Menlo Park, right? Where people from different parts of the ecosystem in the schools and the different school systems could come together with people from elected officials and others from the community and begin to work on creating some pathways that really made sense, right? If they've got this partnership with Block Power to electrify, how might we encourage, the next logical step to help high school students in this area, and then start building pathways that go pathways and educational opportunities that align, that go K through 12. And then likewise, a more speculative one in Camden County, New Jersey. At the moment, there are a mix of small towns in this area. It's right outside of Philadelphia, heavily impacted by pollution and other environmental things. It's very much a car-centered area, and the premise here is that small towns are interested in revitalizing their livelihood, really, and not be, and thinking 30 years down the road, how might they become less car-centered? And how might they become a richer part of the regional economy without in a greener way simultaneously? And so there's some interesting things happening there. You can imagine it'd be a very different kind of map that they'd be building as they're having these conversations with the Regional Planning Commission, with some interesting, even though they might still be working on active transportation with safe routes and other partners, there definitely are also opportunities to be working with other kinds of agencies and organizations. And then the last one is a very new thing that's about to happen in California. California has initially wanted to devote $500 million to create something called the Golden State Pathways, which was a kind of career technical education that would reinforce all the other career pathway work that's happening in the state and dual enrollment work that's happening in the state already. But for the first time, California, the good thing is, for the first time, California has explicitly called out climate pathways as a priority area, which is phenomenal news because the state has had big climate ambition for a while, right? In terms of phasing out gas-powered cars, being an early mover there, and its commitment to going net zero and so on. This unfortunate part is that the state looks like it's negotiating down from $500 million to $100 million to fund this work in the first round. And so it looks like it's still going forward, but perhaps at a smaller funding level. And what it will do is provide funding for local educational agencies to create these pathways in their own districts. And so it's still a really, really big thing. And it will look very different in different parts of the state. You can imagine that there may be, that the climate related pathways that are developed in the Central Valley, where ag is a big deal, will look different from the Bay Area or from greater Los Angeles and so on. But still, you can imagine, what I'd like to imagine is that we can use this kind of framework to think about not just the first year of funding, but how to begin mapping out those conversations and interactions so that we can have these bigger conversations and start building these collaborative efforts. I'm not going to read all of these, but I think this work requires a lot of new approaches and mindsets. And I think it's for that reason, a really rich and exciting area, but I also think that it means like rethinking how we think about school leadership, right? There's a lot of school leaders who are used to dealing with climate as a delegation problem. Like, who can I give this to? Is this my career technical education people over here? Or is it my STEM and AP people over here? Or is it my facilities people and it's a lot of current district and school leadership is, focused on that values that are held and delegated rather than values that are embodied. And so I think that's one of the big challenges that I did want to call out. And then the second one is really, I think the implication here is hope that if this works well, if these collaborative conversations work well, that you end up with a better, more rooted sense of the school in the community, that the school is a site of innovation and opportunity creation, right? And knowledge creation. And I think that is, well worth the price of change. And I think there's some pitfalls. We can talk about these if people want, but I just wanted to mention these. Like the idea that even though the school has a very critical role to play, that sometimes, and depending on how their schools are structured in different parts of the United States, that focusing on individual schools may actually keep systemic injustices out of view, depending on how the school and school systems have been created. That said, I do think there are things we can learn from lots and lots of schools, and even the schools of great privilege and even private schools. But it is still something to pay attention to. That relates to the third one, which is like, I do see in climate work sometimes this temptation to create a very pure island of, an exemplar island that is cut off from the inequities that it's a part of. Yeah, so I don't want, that's pretty much my slides. So I wanted to actually jump in. I can go back to anything and, I didn't stop sharing. So wanted to jump back in there. I know I saw that there were messages coming in, so I don't know if there were questions yet, but there we go. Yeah. So I wanted to now open it up to make sure we had lots of time to see if this framework idea made sense to folks, and if it didn't, let's talk about it, or if it did, let's talk about it.
Tamara, I know you're saying something, but you're muted.
Okay,
Maybe calling
sorry.
on Ingrid.
Yes, thank you very much, Mark. I see Ingrid has a question. Go ahead, Ingrid.
Yeah, I had a few questions, but maybe I'll start with just one and maybe come back if there's time. So I work in a non-formal education environment. I work at a natural history museum and a nature center. And we have sometimes had kids from local schools do kind of service learning with us. So they come out and do some sort of volunteer project. But there's some learning involved in that. And I'm wondering, is that something that you think fits within this framework? And do you have any examples of where that's been done really successfully and had positive outcomes that you could talk about?
I mean, I can imagine it. I mean, I feel like yes. I guess I want to back up for a second and say, I absolutely think that could be part of the ecosystem here in this framework. Even if the sending school hasn't created any kind of, I don't know, like does the sending school have any kind of way to integrate that back into the student's plan? I think there's a lot of things that can be, this is a big ecosystem work, right? And so that seems like a really healthy tendril that could be supported and become, with additional conversations, could even be more, you could create even more value over time for future students, like having this student reflect on it, having that school help integrate it in the student pathway or maybe portfolio. Yeah, and I think, institutionally too, I'd love to hear, on the flip side, having been a museum person at one point, is it something that's sustainable on the institutional side too? Does it drag in? It sounds very valuable on the surface, and is it something that the institution can support? Would be another question I would have.
Okay, thank you. Ginger, you have a question.
Well, question, but more comment maybe. I think this is really interesting and intriguing. And I have been, this is the first time you've met me, Mark, but some of the others have heard me. I have my feet in non-informal environmental education, public engagement. I'm a member of the International Association for Public Participation, and I'm also involved with the American Society of Adaptation Professionals. And a big part of my climate grief is silos. Like I freak out that these organizations I'm not seeing enough overlap. I don't see enough people talking to each other. And so one of the things, maybe as you're moving forward with the California plan, since you might have a statewide test bed, is resiliency centers. Why are our schools not automatically turned to as facilities in emergencies? They are public facilities. They probably have HVAC systems. My community of 350,000 in Southeast Washington has had extreme heat and smoke events. We have not yet had them together, but 30 or 40% of our housing stock does not have central air, just like the Bay Area, and it's older and leaky, and we have no shelters available. And it's just mind-boggling to me that schools, which are already public facilities, are not part of it. And students can be taught to be carers and supporters and help in the kitchen and help get people settled into a shelter for the night. Or the drama department could do, lead role playing activities where people practice what's it like to come to a shelter because we need to keep our seniors safe, and how do we care for our senior, whatever. So this is really cool. I'm super excited. And I'm also going to share your information with, if you haven't listened to it, the America Adapts podcast, because Doug Parsons talks a lot about climate careers and adaptation training, and that there's just not a lot of it out there yet.
Yeah. That's great. I like that a lot. And I'm excited about the California Golden State Pathways work because it incentivizes schools and districts to start reaching out and thinking about themselves as those hubs. Doesn't talk explicitly about resilience center becoming resilience centers, but it certainly lends itself to that as that is absolutely in that adaptation mode. That is absolutely.
And it doesn't break down the equality part is really important. But again, if the school was the focal part of the community, at least in the poorest neighborhoods, you have a central point. At least there would be a central point for people to gather and protect each other and help each other.
Great.
Hey, thank
Thanks,
you.
Ginger.
James, you have a question or comment?
Yes, comment. So in general, Mark, really, really glad that you're doing this. And what I want to just do is like if we can be patient, treat the Bay Area as at least one of the places where everything Mark is talking about can really take off and be, something to show what can be done around the country. I'm trying to express that we've been doing a lot of work in this realms, and anything anybody else is doing here, this is the last thing I would want is any competition. Is like let's share. We can share this. So as I'm trying to, I guess it's like how to give at least an idea of it. I can break down for you specific programs, opportunities, relations. It could be by what city, what county in the Bay Area. So we can just run around the Bay Area and look at all of them. We can look at what kind of career paths are you speaking of. Okay, now I'm going to be strongest in energy and areas like environmental justice and trees, right? But I can point to others that are doing things. The type of programs we work with, the organizations we work with, and I was just about to put in the chat. How about just for examples, the cities themselves, the counties themselves, the University of California, and these are different programs than we're talking about Eclipse and things like that. So we can bring in Eclipse and 10 strands and things. Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, Berkeley National Laboratory, Sandia National Laboratory. These are gigantic organizations that do a lot of work in this area, and we can bring them in on career paths on climate change and that's what they want to do. California State Universities. A lot of these programs are either sponsored by them or at them. And, just want to give an example. Just coming up in 8 days, we're essentially the anchor, Mobile Climate Science Labs, the anchor exhibitor in front of the City Hall at the Civic Center Plaza for a STEM Career Day it's a STEM Career Day for students of color. That's a great event. You've probably seen me with the background sometimes, the pictures of this. And the way we work is we have things and we can bring people in is like, yes, we just talk to the people who are hosting and say, yep, well, you're already giving us all the space for bringing in all these tents and things. Well, we're going to have this guy, Mark, he does this great stuff. We have this guy, Eric, and they already know we're going to bring Clean Network. I mean, that's always the case. I just need more people who can kind of represent Clean Network because we've got all these people doing hands-on labs and things like that. So I rattle on enough, but is that a reasonable yes that you're getting from some of us?
For sure, yeah. And on that note, I think, we're really interested. I'm working with some folks from 10 Strands and other places on the California Environmental Literacy Initiative as the Golden State Pathways program rolls out this summer and fall. We want to make sure that we're supporting, so if a district says, hey, we'd love to do this, but we don't know where to start on the climate side, like we'd love to come in and support that work so that districts say, oh, we could work with Eric's group and James's group and whoever is, appropriate in their county or in their state, who can help develop their ideas and plans. That's wonderful. Thanks, James.
Eric?
Thanks, Tamara, and thanks, Mark, for a great presentation. I just wanted to pick up on a couple things you shared. One, that the climate change education ecosystem is much broader than the standard K-12, schools, obviously. And so I really appreciate that, because just having been in the sort of the informal learning and teaching space like you for a while, but working directly with formal educators too, the synergy between them is really, really powerful. And then wanted to pick up on the pitfall that you mentioned, just focusing on one school. And I'm just looking at Jim's picture on his screen, his screen right now, which is this oak that he's just been able to essentially help spearhead. And we talked about last week on the clean call, right? This one oak takes up the physical footprint of the entire school garden at that school. It's an incredible asset to the school, and Jim has centered it as an environmental justice project. So, but this is at this sort of the preeminent, sort of maybe the most sought after high school in Oakland. So again, this pitfall of only focusing on that school, we have to be careful. But this case study and example of this preserved oak that has is a tremendous resource is a very powerful story. But then you look across at a school like Castlemont in Deep East Oakland, underserved students are the principal demographic, but they have this vast garden. They have the best garden of the entire district. So uplifting, even within one district, uplifting the powerful assets and things that are going on at each of these schools, is sort of to remember that we can learn not only from the principal school of Oakland, or the most sought after, but these other schools which have tremendous things going on. Or Oakland High School has a great capstone project and efforts underway at that school. So, and then sharing opportunities across districts. So like I'm doing a lot of work with Berkeley Unified in Oakland, and there's places that those two districts can learn from each other. And one thing that's becoming evident to me, that when within a district, when the infrastructure facility side of the house doesn't work well or play well with the educational side. So we want environmental literacy across schools, but we also want to build green schools and campuses. And where you have that synergy with those two departments playing well together, which this tree exemplifies that exact thing. I mean, if those departments are in synergy under great leadership coming from the top, great things are going to happen. But if they're not seeing opportunity to work well together, it's really a missed opportunity. So again, I think amplifying those case studies, like maybe down in San Mateo, where you get some synergy within the district itself, also these partnerships between the city and the school districts through their ECAP projects, a lot of great opportunities to sort of uplift lots of different stories from different districts. So just kind of really picking up on that pitfall that you mentioned, and saying, hey, there's these exemplar partnerships and collaborations that are happening in many different ways, and picking those very strategically to sort of, empower districts across the state, for example, or efforts across the state. I'd say collaborations is really the key that I think I appreciate what you mentioned.
Thanks, Eric.
Okay, thank you. Ingrid, you have another question?
Yeah, Mark, you had a slide called transformation, and I was wondering if you could share your screen again and bring that up, because there was something on that went by kind of too fast for me, and I was wondering if I could ask you to explain it.
Yeah, that's it.
Yes. So at the bottom, it says moving economy back towards original meaning of household. Can you talk more about that? What you mean by that?
Well, yeah, I mean, we, in general, like, we're in an age where the market has, we live in a very secular age, but also in a way, like if you hear the way people talk about the market, right, and what the market gets to decide, then the idea, this abstraction called the economy, this financialized economy, has really taken over a lot of things. And depending on your point of view, I guess if it's working for you, you think it's a good thing, right? But for a lot of educational, cultural, equity kinds of issues, it hasn't worked as well, right? It certainly hasn't worked for the global South and so on. But if we think about the root of the word economy is oikos, which is the Greek word for household, right? It's sort of the management of a household is where this idea came from. And if, I think there's maybe a little bit of Laudato Si or something in here, but that we can think of, managing our or maybe it's indigenous wisdom or both, right? It's like, but managing our household, and including our neighbors and the natural world that we're, that we're living on. That's what that means. It's like moving away from that abstraction and the sort of fealty, the blind fealty towards that abstraction, and back to sort of a more humane understanding of how our relationship to one another and the world around us.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting because, when I was a kid and we had classes in home economics, and maybe that it gets to that sort of subject of managing a household. So interesting, that was preparing us for unpaid work, the unpaid work done in a home like my mother did.
That's right.
But that would be interesting if one could turn that around somehow and making that, recognizing the value of that, making it paid work and the connections with climate change and energy use.
So, so Mark, I have a question.
Absolutely.
You have listed adaptation, mitigation, and transformation as 3 separate things. I think that in order to enable mitigation or adaptation, you need transformation. So I'm not quite sure how transformation is a separate entity in this structure. Can you explain that more?
I don't necessarily think it should be. I do think it is sometimes forgotten, however, and especially like I'm in the Bay Area. And so what I see a lot of is Tesla drivers, to be blunt, who say, I've checked the box, I've done it, I've done the work, I have my Tesla, I have, and I drive it back and forth between my $5 million house and my, whatever. And so they're not seeing past the sort of, because some of the climate mitigation.
Talking about a transformation of mindset.
Yeah. So I think it's trying to balance, it's trying to stretch the idea of, I agree that they should be bound up together. But I do think I wanted to call it out separately because I feel like it's been ignored. Yes, I feel like it's been ignored.
Okay, thank you. James?
Thank you, and thank you, Tamara. One of the things that I would suggest we include, this is something that I and my others in Mobile Climate Science Lab specialize in doing, is making sure that when we're bringing climate and climate action and energy and all these fields in, we make sure these are some of the best programs. These are things the kids love. This is great. It's not, this is for white men only. This is really dull. And this is something that you can't do anything about for like 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, right? You're 15. Yeah, this is something you might do when you're 25. How do what are the careers that kids really like to get into? I think it's something they've had some experience with already, and they loved, and they saw it, and they maybe connected, and they got to work with people in that field. We can do all those things with climate change. We can do all those things with energy. We can do it with environmental justice and trees and things, and all these examples that we do that. It's not dull pedagogy.
I'm glad you said that. That's right. It's so critical, especially, right. And I also don't want to see like CTE programs just turn into sort of what happens for students who aren't on the, for who aren't on the AP Ivy League track or whatever. Oh, we're going to take our underrepresented students and help them find a career only like screwing on a solar panel, something sort of that maybe not, I think you're absolutely right. The activities in school have to be engaging and, world-class, and the careers that we are painting the picture of, right, also have to have that quality of they have to be high road jobs, not only with a good family supporting income, but also, a job where they can keep growing in their work. I mean, basically the same thing we all want.
I think that the idea of utilizing school-based projects, like internal projects where the students design things that appeal to them, whether it's doing the energy upgrade on the school or planting the garden or, you know, having a wellness committee for the school or something like that. You know, I have an interesting story from the Washington Conservation Corps, which is our sort of our state level civilian conservation corps, if you will. And the bulk of their time they spend picking up trash along the roadways, but they also help maintain trails and help with the fires. They aren't on the front lines, but they help in like the meals and mop up and stuff. But we send them when there's a big emergency somewhere else, we send crews to other places. And we had a really amazing story where some young men were on the team the year they went to help with Katrina. And they had, you know, they went with a 15-passenger van and shovels and axes and brooms and thought they were going to be doing cleanup. And they got there and they said, you know, we really need people to help care for these developmentally disabled men. And right now they're sheltered in a high school. And so these kids who really wanted to be fire hotshots, I mean, that's why they joined WCC in the first place, ended up taking care of developmentally disabled adult males. And one of them absolutely fell in love with it and went to school to become a special education teacher. And, you know, that's just, so here he was a, you know, 18, 19-year-old, 20-year-old man who had never even contemplated special ed and indeed wanted a kind of a, you know, adrenaline job and ends up in special ed. And that is the problem with our education system at its root, is that we funnel them through these pathways where they don't get to explore or experience other things. So they can't make an educated choice about what they want to do with their life. And they also are taught that you can only do one thing. Like maybe you could still be a firefighter and an adrenaline junkie, but in your spare time, you could volunteer with Special Olympics because you've just discovered that you like working with developmentally disabled people, right? So yeah, just me going on about silos again. So I like the school-based model.
Yeah, totally agree.
I'd like to sort of ask a little bit more open question, because I've sort of seen these as having the schools be a community hub that enables lots of exploration. Do the activities you have reach out to various companies and organizations that bring that expertise of different opportunities for career directions to the schools, or is it more from the school out directed?
Is that for me?
Well, it's for you or for anybody else who might be involved in this work.
There certainly are. Yeah, there certainly are, like here in California, Climate Action Pathways for Schools is a nonprofit that works with schools and does that kind of exposure, brings that in and bridges industry and also, but it varies. I think in some of the CTE programs, the work exposure is really important, but some pathways are not so generative. They're sort of already assumed that once you're in the pathway, you're sort of, you know, maybe exposed only within that pathway. And so it varies, like to the extent of that variety, I think it varies quite a lot. Yeah, then it's something that we need to work on.
Okay, thank you. Dee?
Oh, hi. I just want to chime in with the praises. Mark, I think what you're doing is so important because there's so much misalignment. I mean, even back to like kind of what Ginger was hinting at, and somebody may have already said about even the old apprenticeship system. There was a direct connection between what kids were playing as, you know, learning, you know, the old toys of playing in a kitchen when girls were supposed to be cooking. I mean, the toys mimicked the expected pathway and hope, and there was the intermingling of the whole ecosystem. And especially because you're in Menlo Park, you've got the entrepreneurial people, you've got the ecosystem out there that is most helpful, people who want to give back, kids who have community credits. There's kind of a reshifting. It's kind of like it's almost like an after school program that connects things more directly in pathways, in career pathways. then, oh, yeah, you go through the, even my own kid is going through a system where like, this may be helpful for a college somewhere someday for I mean, the dots aren't connected. So what you're finding is all the sieve parts where the people are there and could, in the East Coast, I'm in a medical field place, so there's more pharmacy people who could come in and talk, and there's pathways there, but I mean, that's just Zoom also. So I'm just very thankful you're asking the questions and seeing so many places where any two of the dots could,
Right,
any
exactly.
few people,
Yeah,
there's so much room to do better. So thank you
right.
so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Mark. It's been a very interesting conversation. And I mean, the challenges of connecting across different communities and I mean, different groups to actually enable this kind of conversation has been a challenge from the beginning. So I applaud you for your efforts in this area and for this very interesting conversation. We are going to have to end a little bit early today to enable another meeting to come onto this same Zoom room. So I'm going to thank Mark again, and we'll talk again next week. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks, Tamara, for facilitating.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Mark.
Tamara. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone.
You bet.
Bye.
Bye.
Katie, I'm gonna hop off for a minute just to get some water and stuff.
Me too. I'll see you back here in a minute.
And